graciously agreed to co-sponsor this event with us, and that's Professor Alan Wolf, who I think needs no introduction. Just wanted to say that we at the Boise Center, Patty Chang, and I are just delighted to be co-hosts of this event. And for those of you who haven't been here before, welcome to Boston College, and in particular, welcome to the Irish heart of Boston College, Gaston Hall, room 100.
Sponsor is the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston, and its president is here, Mr. Jeff Lewis.
Thank you very much. I'm here to bring greetings from the local Jewish community. As many of you may know, the Jewish Community Relations Council is an umbrella organization of, I believe we are up to 43, is that right, Alan? 43 different Jewish community organizations, and we try to speak with one voice, which is a perfectly impossible exercise, because as anybody who knows the Jewish community knows, there are many, many voices there. But we do try to coordinate policy to some extent. We're obviously delighted to have this conference, and we're very happy to be a part of this conference. I think it's dealing with an issue that we take very much to heart, since we do represent very much American Jewry, profoundly involved in the public square. So we look forward to hearing from our speakers, and thank you all for coming. And I do want to say that as a Boston College undergraduate, the class of 1974, it's great to be back in this great hall, which has a lot of very good memories for me. So thank you.
Well, lest I forget at the end, I want to express my personal thanks to Alan Wolf and to Patricia Chang, a professor here in the sociology department and the associate director of the Boise Center, for helping to organize this, and to Nancy Kaufman, the director of the JCRC, who couldn't be here tonight, but Alan Ronkin, who is here. I'll tell you just a couple of things about this project before I introduce the speakers. 4 years ago, the Pew Charitable Trusts in Philadelphia were interested in supporting research on how major American religious communities become politically engaged and civically engaged, and moreover, how they think about their own engagement in the metaphorical public square. Together with my late friend and teacher, Daniel Elazar, and Professor Jonathan Sarna of Brandeis, who I'm sure is no stranger to many of you, we got the grant from the Pew Trusts to do a 3-year project on the American Jewish community. So we have 2 books coming out looking at all aspects: historical, sociological, political, even philosophical and theological, on Jews as American citizens. We have sponsored 2 public opinion research surveys with Professor Stephen Cohen of Hebrew University doing the research. We have a newsletter, a website, and we were to have on September 12th and 13th a concluding event, a national conference in Washington, D.C. That, of course, was canceled on the morning of September 11th. And like everyone else, it took us a long time to even begin to recover. So instead of a national conference, we're having several conferences around the country, and this is the first one. We have here tonight 4 very accomplished and distinguished scholars and activists. I will introduce them to you all at once, and they will each speak for no more than 15 minutes, and then in the remaining time, we'll have discussion. The first speaker is Professor David Novak, who holds the J. Richard and Dorothy Schiff Chair of Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. He's professor of the study of religion, professor of philosophy there. He has appointments in Toronto's University College, as well as the Faculty of Law the Joint Center for Bioethics, and the Institute of Medical Science. And Professor Novak is the director of the Jewish Studies program. Prior to coming to Toronto, he was the Edgar M. Bronfman Professor of Modern Judaic Studies at the University of Virginia. Professor Novak was born in Chicago and received his A.B. from the University of Chicago, his Master's of Hebrew Literature from the Jewish Theological Seminary in America, as well as his rabbinical ordination, and his Ph.D. in philosophy from Georgetown University. David Novak is a frequent contributor to journals such as First Things. He has a host of academic honors, which would exhaust the entire hour and a half if I were to go through them. Most recently, he delivered the Lancaster Yarnton Lectures in Judaism and Other Religions at Oxford University and at Lancaster University. He's lectured throughout the world. He's the author of 11 books. I think I've read about 5 of them. The latest being Covenantal Rights, which is a study in Jewish political theory. This is David Novak. Professor Michael Broyde, seated in the center, is Associate Professor of Law at Emory University School of Law and the Academic Director of the Law and Religion program at Emory University. His primary areas of interest are law and religion, Jewish law and ethics, comparative religious law. Besides Jewish law, Professor Broyde has taught federal courts, alternative dispute resolution, secured credit, bankruptcy, and other courses. He received his Doctor of Law degree from New York University. And in addition to this, he is ordained a rabbi by Yeshiva University and is a member, a Dayan, a judge of the Beit Din of America, the largest Jewish law court in America. He's published more than 50 articles in various aspects of religion and Jewish law. Dr. Michael Gottsegen, seated to my left at the end, works for CLAL, the Center for Learning and Leadership, and he's the editor-in-chief of eCLAL, an online journal of religion, public life, and culture. He also directs CLAL's internet operation. He received his PhD in political theory from Columbia University and is currently at work, I find this truly amazing, on his PhD in religion at Harvard University. So 2 PhDs soon. He's taught political philosophy at Columbia and Jewish philosophy at Brandeis and has written The Political Thought of Hannah Arendt, a study of Hannah Arendt's contribution to political theory. And to my right is Kevin Seamus Hasson, the President and General Counsel of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty in Washington. As President and General Counsel of the Becket Fund, Kevin Hasson has defended the religious rights of Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Native Americans in cases throughout the country in courts at all levels. Before founding the Becket Fund in 1994, he was an attorney at Williams & Connolly in Washington, D.C., where he focused on religious liberty litigation. From 1986 to 87, he was in the Office of Legal Counsel of the Justice Department, where he advised the Cabinet Departments on church-state relations. He is a 1985 magna cum laude graduate of Notre Dame Law School and also holds a master's degree in theology from Notre Dame. He's appeared in numerous public debates, both in universities and in the national media, and you can often see him in the Washington Post. Okay, without further ado, Professor Novak.
The project that we're part of with funding from the Pew Charitable Trust is, as I understand it, to develop a public philosophy, and understood in the broad sense of that term, for American, although I must, as now I'm a Canadian as well, say North American Jewry. I think that when this is to be done, Jews in North America have to look at such a definition against two backgrounds. Number one, what is our relationship with the larger American or Canadian society of which we are citizens? And number two, against the background of the Jewish state in the land of Israel, the state of Israel, of which our relationship is one that still has not been fully thought out in terms of either by Israelis or, for that matter, by Jews in the diaspora, primarily because the situation in Israel politically and militarily has always been so volatile that we really haven't had the leisure to do this kind of thinking in any systematic, let alone public way. That being said, I think that I'm going to make an initial assumption and indicate why I think this must be the working assumption for Jews who are self-conscious about their Jewish identity, certainly in any diaspora community, and perhaps even in Israel as well, and then indicate how I think this plays out. My assumption is that a Jew owes absolute loyalty to only one community, and that community is the Jewish people. That Jews are part of the Jewish people, and according to Jewish tradition, can neither enter the Jewish people of their own will. Even somebody who converts is actually basically converted. They don't convert themselves. They're also chosen in a way. And one cannot exit the community even if one chooses another identity. As far as the community is concerned, you neither check in of your own volition and you cannot check out of your own volition. This is how I understand the fundamental loyalty of a Jew. And from my own perspective, theologically considered, this is precisely because God has chosen the Jewish people, and therefore, as someone who's been born into the Jewish people, I am part of that election. That status of a Jew within the Jewish people is not the same. I want to point that out, especially in terms of living in a non-Israeli society, is not the same as my loyalty to the state of Israel. My loyalty to the state of Israel is to a state of which I happen not to be a citizen, but nevertheless, which I think is very much working in the best interests of the Jewish people. But there again, it is not a polity that can, no polity, no humanly created polity can make the absolute claims upon me that the Jewish people can make upon me. The Jewish people, that is, as constituted by the Torah. What the rabbis call Knesset Yisrael, the congregation in the cosmic sense of that term. Now, if that is the case, then some people would find, many Jews would be uncomfortable with that kind of an assumption, because what does that mean in terms of our being participants in a society such as the United States and Canada? However, I don't find it inconsistent. There's a difference between being a part of the Jewish people, like the part of a body, and being a participant in a democracy. Because the thing about democracy that is so attractive to Jews, and I would think to other peoples of other traditions as well, especially religious traditions, is a democracy does not make the absolute claims upon me that the Jewish people make upon me. The Jewish people make a claim upon me, for example, to reproduce, bring Jewish children into the world. A secular state cannot make that claim upon me. The Jewish people require that if need be, I die as a martyr rather than become something else. A secular state might require me to risk my life in war, but it does not require me to die as a martyr. In other words, there is only inconsistency in terms of this absolute loyalty to the Jewish people if one regards participation in a democratic society to be a competing absolute loyalty. But I would argue that one's participation in a democratic society is precisely because it does not make absolute existential claims upon me. And therefore, when a democratic society does make these type of claims upon me, it is no longer really functioning democratically as understood, let's say, in a constitutional democracy. Now, that being said, therefore, I think that when Jews, and here I'll speak of diaspora Jews, specifically North American, that is United States and Canadian Jews, make decisions or attempt to formulate positions in the community on questions of public policy, I think that there are three criteria that have to be consulted. Three criteria that have to be consulted, all of which are consistent with, if not derived from, our ultimate and complete loyalty to the Jewish people as, I would theologically define it, as the elected community of God. The first, and it's a question of which order one goes in terms of approaching questions, but I would say that the three are as follows. Number one, an aspect of Jewish public policy, when the Jewish community and when we mean the Jewish community, we really mean the Jewish communities, but when any organized group of Jews in our society make a public policy position, I think that it has to consult three criteria. Number one, it has to be consistent with the Torah. It has to be consistent with the Torah and Jewish tradition. Now, that can mean one of two things. It can mean in some cases that literally we have to have a halachic warrant. Jewish law has to regard this as something that either ought to be done or ought not to be done. In a number of cases of public policy, it cannot possibly be that legally specific, but even then, one has to look upon a public policy stand. Is this something that contributes to the overall purposes that Jewish thinkers have derived from the Torah, the overall values, if you will, or general principles of the Torah? Is this something which is consistent with them and furthers them or not? So it's either a specifically halachic decision. For example, if you want to have a public policy statement on physician-assisted suicide, I'll give you an example in medical ethics. Here's something where you really do have to consult literally the halakha, Jewish law, to decide what should be the case. In other situations, like, school vouchers, you can go on and on about these things, one has to look at it in a broader sense. So that's criterion number one. Criterion number two is the self-interest of the Jewish people. The self-interest of the Jewish people. This is something, by the way, that is more understandable in a Canadian context than in an American context. And the reason is because whereas the American notion of polity is very much based upon the idea of the social contract, that we are individuals who come together to create a polity, in Canada there's much more of a notion of what are called founding peoples. That is, the people who've made up the polity do not do so as anonymous individuals, but do so as very much part of earlier, older communities. So that, for example, in Canada, the founding nations, English and French, and then later recognized what we call the original peoples, really not only meant English and French, it really meant either Catholic or Protestant. And when Jews became a factor in Canadian life, then, of course, it had to be expanded in terms of a founding people. So therefore, what is in the best interest of the Jewish people? And especially the Jewish people living in that society, but even the Jewish people worldwide. And the third aspect that has to be is what I would consider to be general morality. Now, general morality is also something which, if not derived from the Torah, is at least endorsed by the Torah. That's a kind of a philosophical debate in Judaism. That is, the Jewish tradition either teaches or recognizes, there's a difference, the fact that there are a number of moral standards that we regard as binding on all people. As binding on all people. Not so much because we say that's what other people should do, not kind of imperialism, but because it's recognized, in fact, in the Jewish tradition, that these standards were in place even before the Jews accepted the Torah, and the Torah did not repeal these standards. The Torah improved upon them, elaborated on them, but did not basically repeal them. So you have the three criteria of the teaching of the Torah, either specifically legal or more generally theological, the best interest, the self-interest of the Jewish people, and general morality. Now, at times, there are going to be conflicts or seeming conflicts between these three criteria. There are times that Jews might think that what is in their best self-interest really is something that would be contrary to the Jewish tradition. In that case, I would say, as a traditional Jew, that the tradition trumps our notions of self-interest, that we have to rethink what is the self-interest of the Jewish people so that minimally it doesn't contradict the Torah and maximally actually puts it into practice. There are times that people will see a conflict between general morality and what is in the best interests of the Jewish people. I think that this is a difference that's apparent, not real, because the Jewish tradition clearly recognizes that all of these standards that the Jewish tradition recognizes as being a general, even universal morality are built into the Jewish tradition. There's a principle in the Talmud that says that there is nothing that is prohibited to the Gentiles, which is permitted to the Jews. In other words, Jewish morality is supposed to be stricter, not more lenient, than what we regard as binding on everyone else. So that therefore, Jews can make claims upon one another that do not contradict general morality, but actually, in effect, add to it or raise it to another level that we could not expect of other people. But there are certain minimal kind of moral standards. So therefore, I think that all of these factors have to be taken into consideration. And I think that one of the problems in Jewish public policy kind of thinking is that all three factors are frequently not taken into consideration. In other words, there's a certain type of Jewish public policy. I think of the type of Jewish public policy that is especially wedded to liberal notions of polity, liberal notions of strict separation of church and state, that basically will only look at kind of general principles. And Jews will argue for this not as Jews, but simply as anonymous citizens of the society. There's another segment of the Jewish community that will simply argue what is in the best interest of the Jewish people without considering whether this is consistent or not with any kind of general morality or whether it's consistent with the full teachings of the Torah. And then, of course, there is a point of view of some Jews, especially of a very traditional or Orthodox variety, who will only consult the Torah and the tradition and will not be concerned at all about any kind of general morality and will not be concerned even about what is in the best interests of the Jewish people, because frequently what's in the best interest of the Jewish people or even general morality can influence the way one interprets the Torah. So there's kind of there's a dialectic here. There's an interrelationship between these three factors of the Torah and Jewish tradition, the best interest of the Jewish people, and questions of general morality. I think that this is a very propitious time for such a project as what is being sponsored by the Center for Jewish Community Studies that we are under their auspices here this evening. Because I don't think it has been until very recently that Jews have felt comfortable enough in the United States, let alone Canada, which in many ways is a newer Jewish community, have felt comfortable enough in the society to actually really want to formulate a coherent Jewish policy. Most of Jewish public policy until very recently, and even until this day in many cases, has been a very kind of defensive kind of posture. A kind of posture that we really don't believe that we are insiders in this society. We're really a vulnerable, marginal sort of group. And therefore, it's only until recently that we have felt comfortable and secure enough, not only as citizens, but as Jews in the society, to formulate this kind of policy. And I would suggest it be formulated based upon these three criteria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Michael.
I confess, as I was listening to Dr. Novak, I didn't know if I should respond to what he said, because he spoke so eloquently, and yet, in my view, not at all my sense of where the Jewish tradition lies. Or should I say what I wanted to say, completely ignoring his opening remarks? And I'm going to try to do both. And I know I'm going to be subject to a squeeze play afterwards, which is okay. That's a part of the intellectual give and take. I'll start with my premises and then I'll move on to my conclusions. In my view, the Jewish tradition is made up of a set of internal rules which intensely govern, regulate, dictate, and demand the way Jews behave, internal to themselves, and that we can call these set of laws Jewish law. Part of Jewish law is an obligation to obey and participate in secular society and to observe the rules of secular society. Jewish law does not mandate, in the classical sense of the word mandate, in the sense of compel or direct, an overt participation in the secular world so as to make the secular world a better place. Such activity is at best can be described as encouraged, even though Jewish law does have a universal code that predates Jewish law. We'll call that the Noachide Code, which it imposes upon everybody. It's not part of Jewish law in the classical sense of the word that we would use this term, and Jews bear no obligation to participate in the secular society out there around us to ensure morality by the community that we live in. This is a very basic, important philosophical point that I start with that I suspect Dr. Novak does not agree with. So it's important to put it to you in my Jewish law view rather than my Jewish philosophy view. Even though we recognize very intensely that non-Jews are bound by a moral code, and that moral code creates right and wrong for Gentiles, Jewish law does not dictate that Jews be in the business of enforcing morality in the secular community, and that we are allowed a much greater sense of a laissez-fairness towards secular society than we are towards our internal Jewish community. All Jews are interconnected one with another, and we recognize as matters of theology that we are judged not only by our own righteous activity, but by the good and bad activity of the community of Jews around us. We do not, as a matter of Jewish law, or in my view, Jewish philosophy, feel that way about the broader community around us. It is nice and proper that the community around us behave well, and we would not be in a situation of affirmatively encouraging misconduct by the community around us, but centrally we bear no obligation to seek enforcement of universal law and morality on the secular world around us. This should not be understood to mean that we don't believe there is such a morality. It's that we are not the world's policemen, and we were not put on this earth to be chosen in that role. To the extent that we believe in the notion of being a light unto the nations, it is in the model of the famous Radak, a medieval commentary on the Bible, a lighthouse. Lighthouses stay in one place and illuminate. They do not go around shining light on people who do not wish to be shined on. They stay and illuminate. Those who wish to be found in the light of the lighthouse draw close to it. This is very, very important to understand. So my basic moral premise, my starting point for how I understand Jewish law, diminishes in dramatic, substantive ways how I sense our obligation to the outside world. So when we start by summarizing the propositions in Jewish law as I see them, proposition number one is Jewish law imposes an obligation to compel observance of Jewish law upon Jews in any circumstances that we can. There are many circumstances that we can't, but we bear an obligation to enforce Jewish law to the greatest extent of our own ability on fellow Jews. In modern times, this is vastly curtailed because we live in a free and open society, and thus we don't enforce Jewish law. But on the other hand, even as we cannot enforce Jewish law, we nonetheless recognize an obligation to inform people who are bound by Jewish law what they ought to be doing, even if they are going to ignore us. So we bear an obligation to be guardians of Jewish values for the Jewish community. Even if nobody will listen to that which we say, we bear a duty to say it forcefully and clearly so everyone should understand. In my view, we bear no such obligation to the world at large, And even when we know what is going on in the world around us and we know it to be wrong, we are permitted to stand by silently and not participate, and certainly not denounce the immorality that is running around us. Having said that, it's a good thing to do. Denouncing immorality is a good thing to do for 5 different reasons, the simplest of which is immorality has a creeping influence on your own conduct. And thus, you really don't want to live in a bad society. If there is a single lesson of the biblical story of Lot, Abraham's nephew, it was that it is very hard to be a good person among the Sodomites. And that's a lesson that we all need to learn. But, and this is a very important but, this is not a moral mandate that's an imperative in the Jewish tradition. In the same way that, as I understand the Jewish tradition, there is an imperative to tell people what Jewish law is when they will listen and obey. From that starting point, we move readily to a discussion of practical politics that I confess reaches a completely different result from that Professor Novak has articulated for you. Since we bear no profound obligation to society around us, Jewish communities bear not a moral obligation to participate in a way that articulates the values of Judaism, but instead they bear an obligation to participate in ways that make the world a better place. And making the world a better place is a very practical observation, grounded not in proclaiming morality, but grounded instead in a complex balance of the internal needs of the Jewish community with the external needs of the secular community, with other values as well, with other values, which is simply our obligations to be a good citizen, our obligations not to make too many enemies, our desire to live peacefully among our neighbors without continuously being the clarion call of who's doing what wrong item to whom. So to me, when you pursue a project of Jewish political ethics, I confess I'm silent. I think that Jewish public ethics, when it comes to what the American government ought to be done, is merely practical politics designed to facilitate the long-term best interests of the Jewish community, and it allows participating in the sense of joining coalitions that permit things that are naked violations of Jewish law. And the reason why that is so is a very important one. The secular society that's out there isn't ours. It's not where I, either as a member of a Beit Din or a synagogue rabbi, put forward my vision of morality. We are comfortable with the separation of church and state, and we desire that morality take place in the church part, which we'll call the synagogue, and the state part will be an articulation of practical political activity that's designed to facilitate the best interests of the community as a whole. So I will give you 3 examples just to lay out for you my sense of how the Jewish position works. I'll consider one example that I didn't come in prepared to discuss, but which Dr. Novak mentioned, which is physician-assisted suicide. In my view, physician-assisted suicide is substantively a sinful violation of Jewish law that frequently comes close to murder. So were a congregant to raise his hand in my small synagogue and ask about physician-assisted suicide, I would say such conduct is prohibited. A patient who kills himself in that manner should be treated as one who commits suicide, and a doctor who kills a patient in that manner ought to be treated as a murderer. That would be my answer in the synagogue. Having said that, the question of whether we should encourage or discourage physician-assisted suicide being lawful in the United States is a completely different discussion. And it's grounded not in whether Jewish law permits or prohibits this activity, but is instead grounded in a political calculus that balances the desire that Jewish law not have this activity occur within its community with the realization that freedom and the rights of personal autonomy are treasured values in the Jewish tradition, and letting people kill themselves, as sad as it sounds, sometimes is a way that people are manifest their freedom, and freedom has a large value to the Jewish community, even if some people use their freedom in violations of Jewish law. My second example is gay rights. A little bit more controversial, but equally important. Homosexuality, homosexual conduct, represents a substantive violation of Jewish law, which in the Orthodox and the conservative tradition, and really with anybody who has a close affiliation with the Jewish tradition, recognizes as sinful. And were you to ask in a rabbinic context, one would be told this clearly. Having said that, again, we have, in my view, no clear answer to the question of whether civil rights for homosexuals is a good idea or a bad idea. It might well be that guaranteeing civil rights for all, even as this permits, this in essence enables homosexual activity in society, is nonetheless a good idea, because the granting of civil rights to all creates values in society that are hospitable to the Jewish community. After all, as a minority faith in a country with a strong tradition of religious liberty, but nonetheless a fragile one, we continuously need to ensure that the rights of people to be different are protected. And maybe that's the right answer, maybe it isn't. But in my view, the calculus is not grounded in Jewish law. The calculus is grounded in real politics. And finally, I want to give the example of abortion. And I want to use this example specifically to disagree with an assumption that, perhaps more than an assumption, that Dr. Novak makes. There are situations in Jewish law where Jewish law is more lenient into how it perceives the rights of Jews than how it perceives the rights of Gentiles. And thus, Jewish law permits abortions, in my understanding of Jewish law, in many circumstances where it does not permit, where it recognizes that the universal morality ought not to permit abortions. And that sometimes Jewish law is more lenient than the universal morality. And this has to do with a complex theological discussion about the relationship between universal morality and Jewish law. And thus, it is impossible to craft an abortion law that is both consistent with my understanding of Jewish law and my understanding of the universal code that governs non-Jews. Such an abortion law cannot be crafted, unless, of course, you're prepared to allow government to make distinctions based on one's religious faith before one can have an abortion, which is preposterous in America. So the solution, in my view, to the abortion dilemma is, again, not grounded in the Jewish tradition. It's at its core grounded in political realism as to what maximizes religious rights. So I return to the beginning, and then I'll sit down. In my view, the Jewish tradition has clear views of morality, and those clear views of morality are articulated in the synagogue. It has much less clear views of morality that ought to be articulated out of the synagogue, and even though it recognizes a universal morality, it doesn't believe we need to articulate it. And thus, when it comes to determining governmental policy and Jewish political views, civic participation in American life, we are realpolitik, and we are not advocating a position grounded in morality. Thank you very much.
I hope we get to pursue this frontal disagreement in the question and answers. Dr. Gottsegen.
Hi there. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. And now for something completely different. Not completely different, but the my discussion will be framed in terms of a different set of issues and vocabularies. The question that I want to address is whether religion, and Judaism in particular, can be a force for the renewal of American public life, and especially American political life. Now, Jews are wary, to generalize, of the signs of a return of religion to the public square, to generalize. when Jews, well, when Senator Lieberman was nominated, Jews were thrilled. But when he wore his religion on his sleeve, so to speak, when he invoked his religious faith as a justification for some of his political convictions and positions, many Americans were worried and, in fact, were silently sympathetic to the position of Abe Foxman, who said, basically, Senator Lieberman, we've had a long experience with what happens when religion is in the public square, and if memory serves, that generally doesn't work out too good for the Jews. So you should know better and cool it. And that was and I think in large measure that sentiment expressed by Foxman, in fact, resonates with a deep anxiety. I wouldn't even say ambivalence, just anxiety on the part of many secular Jews, many Jews, religious or otherwise, who are nervous because they cannot imagine that the return of religion to the public square could mean anything other than the return of the cross. Now, the question for me, though, is whether that anxiety is well placed. Well, no, the anxiety is well placed, but whether the anxiety should be sufficient to preclude the endeavor to bring the two together, religion and public life. On the one hand, the secularization of the public square, the separation of church and state, has been a great boon to Jews individually, socially, economically, politically. And I think that's a generally fair argument. And of course, it's no surprise that Jews since 1945 were especially involved in the efforts to secularize the American public square, that the American Jewish Congress was at the fore of these efforts. And as I said, it's been good for the Jews in many ways, and good for not only for the Jews, I mean, good for members of religious minorities who would otherwise not have had the full range of opportunities that American society makes available. The question, though, or the problem, is that this secularization, separation of church and state, in its militant form, whatever that would mean, has a downside that even Jews and other religious minorities should acknowledge. And in my sense of the price paid has been a certain loss of affection for the common good, a certain loss of appreciation for the nobility of political life, that the secularization of American society has elevated the economic sphere and, in effect, subordinated the political sphere. And my sense is that religion's role in political life might be to elevate politics, to bring the common good to the fore as a concern, as an animating object of public affection and zeal, and to turn politics once again into a quasi-religious calling. So in my argument is that the separation of church and state, not only that, the intensification of the American economy, of modern economic life, has seen this diminution of the status of politics. And again, my contention is that religion might be a resource that we as Americans can look to revivify American political life. Now, it's interesting. Robert Bellah, a sociologist, made an argument about, 1967, that America is uniquely dependent upon religion for its well-being. And now he wasn't talking actually about congregational religions in the sense of he wasn't talking about the Jewish. He wasn't talking about synagogues. He wasn't talking about churches. He wasn't talking about mosques and the communities associated therewith. He was rather talking about what he called civil religion. He spoke of the American civil religion, which he believed was absolutely essential for the maintenance of a certain quality of life in America. And basically, his argument was that America is an interesting kind of republic, and I think it holds. I think the argument has a lot to recommend it, and I'm going to have one qualification at the end. But he says that America is an interesting kind of republic. America was born of this Republican tradition, which was very much intent upon creating a citizenry that was dedicated to the public good and dedicated to the political life, and the concern, though, expressed by all the theorists that our founding fathers read, was if you try to create a republic and the populace is too busy tending to their economics, not only will that, let's say, economic egotism of the market or possessive individualism, not only will that distract people from politics in the sense that if people are trained to seek their own personal good or their own private good, they may prefer going into business to participating in town meetings. Of course, that's the case. And secondarily, the tradition is concerned that that politics itself will be corrupted by money, that the self-seeking behavior, which is ostensibly going on in the economy, will actually end up shaping the ethos that people bring to bear in politics themselves. So politics will become the continuation of economics or economic competition or group competition, as if it were not to be governed by some different kind of ethos than economic life. And his sense was that the role of the American civil religion was, his sense was that the American founding fathers nonetheless decided that they would take the risks of corruption, the risks of selfishness in the public square, that they would create what he called and what they called a commercial republic. They would create a commercial republic, which is to say, a republic in which the majority of the population is very involved in getting and spending, in commerce, in mercantile activity, and yet the system as a whole will remain a republic and hopefully not be infected by this ethos. And now there is a solution to this, which Madison came up with, which is, of checks and balances, and if you look at Federalist 10, but Bella doesn't mention that. To Bella's mind, the role of this American civic religion or civil religion is to keep us from succumbing to the ethos of the economic sphere. That the American civic religion, by its emphasis upon patriotism, by its emphasis upon love of and attachment to and zeal for the common weal, for the common good, will check these negative propensities of the economy. So that's his first argument. And he says that American civil religion does this. His second argument, which is a little different, and he says there that the other anxiety which one should have about American political life without civil religion, the other anxiety is that Americans may come to deify the state, that they will that, as we've seen in so many awful instances in the 20th century, that people will mistake the good of their group or the good of their class or the good of their movement or the good of the country with the good per se. And he takes this critique from Reinhold Niebuhr, who argued that monotheism, radical monotheism, is a corrective to this wrong-headed deification of the state. And so Bella looks to civil religion and says, civil religion is essential in American life because without it, we run two risks. One, we will become obsessed with the mercantile spirit, and that will destroy our political life, and we will lose all awareness of the common good. And on the other hand, there's always the risk that we will absolutize our political self-interest. We will absolutize the American interest. We will mistake the American, what's good for America with God's will. And he was writing actually at the time of the Vietnam War, and many criticized him for making this argument on behalf of civil religion. And he was saying, because they thought it kind of played into this confusion whereby the state and its God and its good are all one. And he said, no, that the American civil religion is actually rooted in Judeo-Christian ethical monotheism, that the God of America, or the God of the American civil religion, is the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus. And so long as Americans have a higher loyalty to that God, they will keep their collective egotism, that is to say, their national egotism, in check. So my argument is that Bella is right about the role of civil religion, but where I would differ with him is he was pointing to this thing that was supposedly out there, this thing called the civil religion. But and he pointed to the stories of the founding fathers, the stories of our. He pointed to the symbols of the American polity. He pointed to our holidays in which we are reminded of these important values. But my sense is that civil religion that he was talking about was an illusion, in the sense that it was not self-sustaining. And his argument implicitly acknowledges that the real base of this civil religion that plays and needs to play an important role in American political life is the actual communities of faith, the Jewish communities, the Christian communities, the Muslim communities, the communities of faith that nurture this loyalty to a God that transcends the polity, and two, are the places in which the sympathy for the common good, in which the feeling for the common good, in which social solidarity is taught and learned and transformed into a form of practice. And ideally, and here's where, and I think that in that respect, American religions play a crucial role. One more point, and then I'm done, which is, but my critique of the American religious communities today would be that while they are effective, let's say, at teaching social solidarity, soup kitchens, shelters, food pantries, these are all face-to-face, imminent expressions of a desire to help the neighbor in distress. There's a general failure to make the move from face-to-face compassion to political endeavor. And while there's a long tradition that says that we should, in fact, be involved in tasks of gemilut chasadim, I would argue that today we have greater power and we have a greater understanding of the social causality of these problems. And so the future for American civic or civil religion lies in the communities of faith actually preaching a level of political engagement and political involvement that goes beyond the social action model of many of the churches and synagogues. And I think that there's hope for that, and I think 9/11 presents us, the wake of 9/11 presents us with a great moment in which that might happen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Sorry about that.
Okay. And now our respondent, Kevin Hasson.
Thank you. An apologia and a commercial. Apologia, I am not a rabbi. I am not even a Jew. I'm a Gentile human rights lawyer. And I find myself as a guest here, and I will be a good guest. However, I'm supposed to be the respondent, which is a polite word for provocateur. So I won't be too good a guest because that wouldn't be very much fun at all. Now for the commercial. The organization that I run, the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, defends one idea in three fora. The fora of the courts of law, the court of public opinion, and academia. And the idea is that because the religious impulse is natural to human beings, religious expression from all traditions is natural to human culture. We're not the Christian right, but we're not syncretists either. We believe everybody has the right to be wrong. And if you got any of my two of my clients together in any one day, they would start a fight. But I believe they all have the right to be wrong. So, for example, I don't know if you recall the case where we defended the mechitza and the school buses in the Diamond District in Manhattan for the Skvera Hasidim. We successfully defended their right to have rolling synagogues in Manhattan. We defended the right of a Reformed congregation in Philadelphia to have a synagogue. They wouldn't speak to each other. None of them would be happy, neither of them would be happy terribly. We defended the right of Muslim police officers to grow beards in Newark. And all of them would condemn the Zoroastrian temple that we successfully defended the right to have in Fairfax County. We do it because we think religion is a basic human right, and it's that from that perspective of a human rights lawyer that I want to try and start an argument. When China imprisons Tibetan Buddhists simply for possessing pictures of the Dalai Lama, and the American government says, this is an outrage against religious liberty, China inevitably responds, you are unwisely interfering in our internal affairs. My question is, are they right? When the Sudan literally enslaves Christian and animist children, and the American government says this is an outrage against religious liberty, the Sudan inevitably says, you are unwisely interfering in our internal affairs. Again, the question, are they right? When Iran persecutes the Baha'i simply for being the Baha'i, and we protest, they say you're unwisely interfering in our internal affairs. Are they right? That is a terribly important question for religious liberty, not only in China and Sudan and Iran, but for religious liberty in America, because it's only a restatement of the question, where does religious liberty come from? Does it come from American positive law? Does it come from convenience, or does it come from somewhere higher? If it comes from American positive law, if it's that simple, if it comes from the First Amendment, then the answer to the question, are they right, is very simple. Yes. It's very troubling, too. Look in Article 48 of the Chinese Constitution and say, well, this is nice. It would be even nicer if they enforced it, but it's still no First Amendment. Too bad for the Buddhists. Next case. Sudan and Iran have nothing comparable to a First Amendment. Next case. We don't say that because we believe there is something much more fundamental at play in those situations. My understanding of Professor Novak and Professor Broyde is that they would answer the question, are they right? No, in Professor Novak's case, and maybe in Professor Broyde's case. Because in Professor Broyde's understanding, the question of whether one defends the rights of non-Jews, of Gentiles, is entirely a question of what is good for the Jewish people. That seems to me to be another way of saying there are no universal human rights. And in particular reference to China, Sudan, and Iran, the answer would almost certainly be no. For China, Tibetan Buddhists are the worst kind of dissidents there are because they're separatists. They want to free Tibet. Anybody who sticks up for Tibetan Buddhists can't expect any good things to come from them, to them from China. In Sudan, the Christians, the animists in the south are likewise rebels. Anybody who sticks up for them is in no position to get anything good. And of course, in Iran, the Baha'i are heretics. Jews and Christians, at least, are second-class citizens, people of the book, but the Baha'i can be killed with impunity. Anybody who sticks up for the Baha'i can expect nothing from the Iranian government. So from Professor Broyde's perspective, I think the answer would have to be, yes, they're right. And that's very troubling. It's ultimately troubling for America, because if religious freedom is not a fundamental human right, then it's repealable. The same government that gave it to us can take it away. What if it is a human right? What if the First Amendment was a political compromise that did the best it could aspiring towards being something better. My view. Madison's view, Jefferson's view. Then the right of religious liberty is found not in the contours of what is good or bad in realpolitik. It is not found in what is written or unwritten in American positive law, but is found in the contours of the human heart. What are those contours? I'll argue there are two. Demonstrable simply from human nature, not from the revelation of any particular tradition. First is that human beings come with a built-in thirst for transcendence. We are at our best when we are seeking to find and embrace an ultimate truth that lies beyond the horizons of ourselves. We are at our best. We also seek a horizontal transcendence. We seek to reach out and embrace not just an ultimate truth, but other people around us and everything that's essential to our humanity. We don't smuggle babies home from the hospital in secret. We have brisses, we have baptisms. We don't come of age in secret. We have bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and my tradition confirmations. We don't typically elope in secret. We have egregiously expensive, outlandishly elaborate celebrations. And we don't, unless we've murdered somebody, sneak off in the dead of night to bury them in a landfill. We gather together to weep together. We don't do all these things because we don't live alone. But we don't believe alone either because we don't live alone. We naturally want to celebrate whatever it is that is our tradition in public. So Dr. Gottsegen argues that religion is a public good because it's good for the public. I think it goes deeper than that. I think religion is a public good because humans are public people, and religion is a human good. Now, what does this look like in the public square in America? What would it look like? We've never tried it this way. Religious pluralism in Western, well, in human history is a relatively new phenomenon, and we've only been at it with any seriousness for about 50 years in America. We're not very good at it yet. But there are only three possible models, logically, for religious pluralism. One is the Crusader model. The second is the secondhand smoke model. The third we'll call the Jersey City model. The Crusader model is where one worldview seeks to hijack the power of the state to impose itself on everybody else. It is always and everywhere immoral. It's immoral whether it's late 15th century Spain, whether it is late 20th century Soviet Union, whether it's early 21st century Afghanistan. It is always and everywhere immoral. A very tempting alternative, tempting since the 1960s, has been what I'll call the secondhand smoke model, which says, this religion is just so dangerous that we have to privatize it. We have to say, you can imbibe religion like you can imbibe cigarette smoke in private, consensually. But it's very, very impolite to do it in public. And it's the government's job to protect you from it in courthouses and train stations. That's deceptively successful because it oppresses everybody equally. It's a lie to us from our government about who we really are. If the government were simply the night watchman of libertarian fame, that there was nothing else the government did except provide for the common defense and run police departments, then it wouldn't be a lie. But our government does everything. We celebrate everything from National Catfish Day to National Jukebox Week, and I'm not making those up. We have a comprehensive public culture. We have a comprehensive public education. To have a comprehensive public culture and public education that comprehensively say absolutely nothing about one's search for transcendence is not to say nothing about one's search for the transcendence. It's to say something. What does it say? It says that it's, at best, an optional hobby for people. That lies to us about who we really are. It's really just a variant of the Crusader model. The third model, the Jersey City model, I have 1 minute left, Alan, and I know it, takes its name from a Becket Fund case. We spent 2.5 years defending Jersey City, New Jersey, from a lawsuit by the ACLU. Sometimes we're on the ACLU side, sometimes we're not. Jersey City is ethnically, religiously, culturally, per capita, the most diverse city in America. There are 60 or 70 different ethnicities. There are flag raisings every week for flags I've never seen before. We have ethnic celebrations on a daily basis. And in the midst of it all, they have a menorah for Hanukkah, they have a nativity scene for Christmas, they proclaim Ramadan, they celebrate the Hindu Festival of Lights with the Grand Pagwa Parade. And next to it all, the parade's going back and forth, the flag's going up and down, and everything else, they have the same sign accompanying every display. Through this display and others throughout the year, Jersey City is pleased to celebrate the diverse ethnic and cultural heritage of its people. The ACLU said the religion only had to go. We said, no, a time-lapse photographer would catch it all, and anybody who saw that time-lapse photograph would realize the government wasn't pushing Hinduism, wasn't pushing Islam, wasn't pushing Judaism, wasn't pushing Christianity. It was simply recognizing religion's role in culture generally, and as long as 1,000 flowers were blooming, no one would misunderstand. That, I think, is the model that logically follows from who we really are. It is a model that I would be very interested in hearing Dr. Novak comment on, Professor Broyde attack, and Dr. Gottsegen's thoughts. So I hope I've been a good guest, but not too good a one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. If we had a lot of time, I would love to have the speakers engage each other, but we don't have a lot of time, so I'd like you to engage each other and engage them. Our job in this project is to generate ideas, throw out ideas to stimulate, provoke, and encourage further thought on these weighty matters. So please, if you'd like to ask a question, and only questions, please, no speeches. Come up to one of the microphones and address any of the speakers or all of the speakers.
I would like to hear Dr. Novak's response.
Okay.
Okay, if nobody's running up, so let's do that. Let's have the speakers talk a little bit, just a little bit, and then we'll. Yeah, you can do it.
Okay. I have to inform you so you don't think that there's any collusion. With halakha is called kanunya. Professor Broyde and I normally don't call each other Dr. Novak and Professor Broyde. We're on a first name basis. We've known each other for a long time. And I think we've had an interesting conversation over the years because we have enough in common to have a conversation and enough differences to make it interesting. So here goes. I am not advocating that there be, quote, a or even, let alone the Jewish position on every single social issue. But I'd like to illustrate my point by, since Michael Broyde referred to the synagogue. The synagogue that I go to in Toronto, which is a large Orthodox synagogue, I have a problem with two of the prayers that are said in our synagogue. Now, fortunately, neither of these prayers are kind of central to the liturgies. I mean, I don't have a problem with the Shema or any of the other major prayers, God forbid. I have a problem with the prayer that we say on behalf of the government of Canada, and I have a problem with the prayer that we say on behalf of the state of Israel. And when these prayers are said, I only say part of the prayers. I delete a couple of lines from each one of them. It's said out loud, standing up with the congregation, so I don't make any kind of spectacle of myself. When it comes to the prayer for the state of Israel, the line that says that, and I certainly support the state of Israel and in favor of it, the line that says that it is Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, the beginning of our redemption, that regards the state of Israel as literally being a messianic event, I have religious problems with. As much as I support the state of Israel, I agree with the late Professor Yeshayahu Leibovitz that this is a dangerous mixing of messianism and politics. So in the synagogue, when that line is said, I just simply don't say it. And it doesn't create any halachic problem or whatever. I just simply don't say it. I can't say it in good faith. The second prayer we say is a prayer on behalf, and of course I live in Canada, of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Governor General, and the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada. The equivalent in the United States would be the President of the United States and the Congress and whatever. What's wrong with that? Nothing is wrong with that except the implication of the prayer that we are some kind of foreign body as Jews in either Canada or the United States. This prayer was formulated when Jews were really not citizens of the countries in which they were living. Jews before the French Revolution, especially in virtually every country in Europe, were a foreign entity, like a foreign embassy on French or German or whatever kind of soil. And we had a special contract with the monarch. We were not citizens. We were not participants in the society. We were foreigners in the society who were living there under the sufferance of the society. Now, it seems to me that this is entirely different in a society such as the United States or Canada, where we are citizens and where I think we should not only have opinions in terms of as individuals, but there are times that I think that we should speak as Jews. And there's enough warrant in our tradition. And I'll give two examples. One example concerns Professor Broyde this very day. I was riding up here on the plane from Toronto, and I just had received in the mail the day before the names of a list of people who signed an affidavit on behalf of a Mormon woman at the University of Utah who protested that she had to use profanity and blasphemous language as part of her drama program. Now, on the list of the amici curiae, the friends of the court, people who filed, I didn't read everybody's statement, but on that list was Professor Michael Broyde, Rabbi Gedalia Schwartz, head of the Bet Din in Chicago, where my daughter and her family live, Rabbi Barry Freundel of a synagogue that I go to when I'm in Washington, which is frequently, and myself. So apparently, we all thought that this was something that required some kind of statement. We were all identified clearly as Jewish scholars and rabbis and whatever. That's number one. Number two, one of the issues in Canada that is, and it's probably been debated in the United States, it was in Hawaii, is the question of same-sex unions. Now, I think that the Jewish tradition has an opinion on that, and I think the Jewish tradition has an opinion on that applies to everyone, not just Jews. I filed an affidavit which created a tremendous stir in Canada. There were phone calls to the University of Toronto calling for my dismissal on the grounds that I'd abused my authority as professor of Jewish studies, even though I filed it as an individual. Well, I also persuaded the Bet Din of Toronto to sign on as an amicus brief. I pointed out to the Bet Din of Toronto, of which I'm not a member, but I pointed out to them that if you don't give a Jewish perspective on this, then there will be secular Jewish organizations who will, and you're not going to like what they say about, quote, a Jewish position, let alone the Jewish position. Apparently, I was persuasive because they did endorse my affidavit. So here again, I don't think that there needs to be a Jewish position on everything, but I think that to talk about the world out there as if we were not participants in it, even the state of Israel, which is a sovereign Jewish state, is still a participant in, not a part of, but a participant in a larger world order. And therefore, for that reason, I think earlier models of just kind of not worrying about what the Gentiles are doing is something that is not the case because we are fellow citizens with them, something which is a rather new factor in human history.
Good evening. Heard mention of a couple of medical-related issues earlier, and there's another one that's been getting more attention in the last few years, and that's the issue of male circumcision. And what I've heard and read in the media are things like Jewish advocates are claiming that the critics are anti-Semitic, and also that some of the advocates, for example, a proportion of doctors who advocate circumcision are Jewish, and some of the critics claim that maybe there should be some separation, or that one being Jewish may be an influence on medical opinion. I mean, it's just a very complex, sensitive issue, and it seems to raise very strong feelings on both sides. And at the same time, a growing number of people feel there's a need for public discussion. and of course, again, touching on areas of religion and sexuality, etc. So I'm wondering if the members of the panel might have some suggestions about how to facilitate public discussion of this controversy.
Anyone want to rise to the occasion on that?
So I'm going to be ever practical because that is my motif in life. I think the Jewish community needs to vigorously work to protect the right of people to practice ritual circumcision, independent of any medical evidence for it or against it, and independent of a reasonable secular assertion that optional surgical procedures should not be conducted on children until they're of the age of consent. Notwithstanding both of these principles, which in the abstract strike me as vaguely reasonable, the Jewish community seeks not to be an ideological participant, but a protector of its own interests. And since, in my view, essentially we adopt practical positions rather than philosophical positions, practical position here is to defend the right of circumcision in the United States so that there should be the right of circumcision, R-I-G-H-T, should be allowed to exist so that there should be a right of circumcision, R-I-T-E. I don't need a theoretical basis to do this. And we should form whatever practical coalitions are necessary to defend our right to practice our religion as we see fit.
I agree with the practical result, but I think it's important, and I would take the case, and if anybody ever needs a lawyer, we work for free.
Those are the best kind.
You have an unlimited supply of clients when you do that. However, it's important you can't win cases, and you shouldn't win cases without philosophical reasons behind them. And this is a great example of the free exercise of religion. It's a perfect example of the free exercise of religion. Not just believing something, but having to do something. And the government not being allowed to interfere simply because it doesn't understand. It's a perfect example of the free exercise of religion. It shouldn't just be an exercise in power politics, although if power politics is what it takes to enforce the free exercise of religion, more power to it.
Yeah, but speaking of coalitions and practical politics, I was just commenting to a Muslim colleague of mine at the University of Toronto, considering that, the tensions between Jews and Muslims in this day and age. There are two things that I think would make a marvelous coalition of Jews and Muslims and bring them together, certainly in North America. Number one would be an attempt to ban the circumcision of infants, because Muslims do it as well, different age, but still most Muslims do it anyway. And the second thing is that, once again, the notion is being floated of the canonization of Queen Isabella, who, if you recall, expelled both the Jews and the Muslims from Spain in 1492. That would certainly bring Jews and Muslims together. But to be serious about it, this is a very serious issue. And I don't think that it's only motive. I mean, one can always see an anti-Semitic motivation in it, but I will take it, for example, Professor Margaret Somerville of McGill Law School in Montreal. A strict civil libertarian, argues that that involuntary surgery, which is not life-saving surgery, on an infant is a violation of their rights. In other words, here again, that people should decide if they want to be circumcised when they are adults. Now, were this to become, it's a minority view, but I've said this to Canadian Jewish audiences, were this to become the law in Canada, then every one of these somehow 300,000 Canadian Jews would seriously have to question whether he or she could remain a citizen of Canada, since there are other options. This is serious business. Now, in terms of what Mr. Hasson was saying, I think that there's also a point here, and that is, it's a notion of how we enter civil society. Do we enter civil society as simply lone, anonymous individuals with a minimal set of rights, or do we enter civil society coming from rich, thick traditions, which are inevitably concerned with the transcendent, i.e. religious? And that is the big difference. The fact is that we Jews have to believe that we enter civil society, not as lone individuals, but coming from a very rich religion and culture. And if that civil society is not going to make it possible for us minimally to practice our own religion, If we have an alternative, then we have to seriously consider whether we can be loyal to that society or not. So this is a fundamental question. It's even become a question in Canada with a small Mennonite-like community who are actually being, their children are being taken away from them because they practice spanking, claiming that the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. Now, they regard this as their religious right. They do not say that their children should be brutalized, and they would certainly agree that if a child were, be beaten to the point of brutality, they should be taken away from his parents. But they regard this as part of their parental right. This is an intrusion of the state upon the prior religious rights of a community. These religious rights are not individual rights, they're communal rights. Another example, the Human Rights Commission in Saskatchewan required a Baptist church to remove from its bulletin board a quotation from the book of Leviticus saying that a man should not lie with a woman. A man shall not lie with a man as he was lying with a woman, from the 19th chapter of the book of Leviticus, claiming that was hate speech. That was hate speech. Yeah, we chuckle about this, but there is a militant kind of secularism in our society, which basically regards religion, that is religious traditions, as the enemy. Now, it seems to me that thoughtful Jews, and for that matter, thoughtful Christians or thoughtful Muslims, should be very concerned about this and indicate why this is not only detrimental to them as religious communities, but undemocratic in terms of the way we understand a democracy. These are very important issues that I think have to, unfortunately, we have groups like the Beckett Fund or whatever that will actually be willing to go into court when all these issues wind up in court one way or another.
We have time for just one more question, then Professor Wolf is passing. Anyone else?
Could you just respond to this?
There's one more question out there.
I'd like to point out to a tension that there is between the notions of equality and pluralism that Professor Hasson brought up, and the ideas of Jewish law that requires Jewish people to do what they need to do, which it does. Equality and pluralism are not high values in Jewish law, and whether Jews like it or not, they have to. If they obey the halakhic law, they have to go by it. And this tension plays out very strongly in Israel between a democratic state and Jewish state, where people that pursue pluralism have a problem with having religious laws and things of that kind. And I think it's a major tension, and I don't know how it can be solved, but it's two different views, I think.
Can I think that this goes to, you raised a very basic question in your comments. As I understand the Jewish tradition, religious pluralism is a practical value, and it is not a theological value. We do not believe that people have the right to worship whatever God they want in whatever way they wish. And we are overtly hostile on a theological level to, for example, paganism or polytheism. And that nobody vested in the Jewish tradition can advance a philosophical mandate within the Jewish tradition supporting paganism or polytheism.
You can't do one in the Christian tradition either.
I agree with that. You can't do it in the Christian tradition either. Thus, if you wish to defend religious liberty in the Jewish tradition, you have to do it in a practical way, which is, in my view, the defense of the Baha'is is grounded in a calculus, which is defending the right of the Baha'is betters the lot for everybody, which may be true, may not be true. And the only way you can advance the agenda of the Beckett Fund consistent with your own religious beliefs is by adopting a practical defense, which is religious pluralism advances the religious rights of us all. Certainly as a good Catholic or a good Jew, we are not religious pluralists. We are truth seekers, and the truth that we seek causes us to recognize that some religious beliefs are false. And the only way we can defend the right of people to advance religious beliefs that we think are false is by saying the consequences of living in a society where false beliefs denounce each other and kill each other is the Crusader model, and that makes us very uncomfortable practically. But of course, if God's hand were apparent on this earth and he were directing the Crusaders, we would be more comfortable. But I don't see that.
You remember the Pink Panther movie? I thought you said your dog did not bite, and the answer was, that's not my dog. That is my response. Of course, you can't come up with a Christian argument for why pagans might be right. They're not. But what you can come up with is a Christian argument, and I would be very curious. I have friends who are Orthodox Jews who tell me that such an argument exists within Judaism too. It's not my place to say whether it does or doesn't. But
Practically.
No. The argument that I'm about to enunciate, and that is, this is the Catholic argument, and I'm not saying it should be the Jewish argument. I'm just simply saying it's the Catholic argument, and that I'm curious as to whether an analog exists. That people have the right to be wrong because they're created in the image and likeness of God, which gives them the ability to know and to choose, and therefore quintessentially to love. And that the image and likeness of God, in the Catholic view of the phrase from the book of Genesis, has everybody seeking transcendence, thirsting out for, as I said in my remarks, for freedom or for a truth that lies beyond the horizon of themselves. So it's not a good thing to be a pagan, but it's a good thing to seek for God, and it's such a good thing to seek for God that you have the right to be wrong, even though you're wrong. So that's the basis that the Becket Fund defends religious liberty for everybody on. Not that all religions are equal, they're not. But rather that all human beings are equal, and that while error may have no rights, erring people do.
It's 9 o'clock, and actually we're just getting started, but we have to bring it to a close. So I thank you for your attentiveness. I hope you've been intellectually stimulated by the presentations and discussions. And I thank our hosts and our speakers. Thank you.
I enjoyed your remarks very much. I'm 100% on board, but only practically. No, I understand.